Welcome to the most powerful story you'll ever hear. This is not just a biography. This is not just history. This is a journey into the mind that shaped the modern world. And if you're someone who's learning English, this video is perfect for you. Because you'll not only improve your English listening, thinking, and understanding, you'll also train your mind to speak clearly, question deeply, and grow wisely, just like Plato did. So sit back, listen closely, and stay till the end. Because this is the story of Plato, the man who started with questions and ended up changing the world. But before he became a philosopher, before he created the world's first university, before he taught Aristotle, who taught Alexander the Great, he was just a boy with a powerful mind and an even more powerful dream. Let's begin. Part 1. The boy who was born into two worlds. Plato was born in 428 or 427 BCE in Athens, Greece, one of the most advanced cities in the world at the time. Athens was a city of thinkers, poets, warriors, and politicians. It was a place where art and science lived together, but also a place where truth was often sacrificed for power. Plato's family was one of the most powerful and respected in Athens. His father, Ariston, claimed to be a descendant of the early kings of Athens. His mother, Perictione, was related to Solon, the famous lawmaker of Athens. So from the moment Plato was born, he was surrounded by politics, wealth, and high expectations. He wasn't born a poor child in the streets. He was born into the elite class, with access to the best education, the best thinkers, and the best opportunities. But even as a young boy, Plato felt something was missing. Plato was given the best teachers in music, poetry, gymnastics, and mathematics. But unlike most students, he didn't just want to learn answers. He wanted to know why the answers were true. Other children memorized lessons. Plato argued with his teachers. When someone told him, "Justice means doing what the law says," Plato would ask, "But what if the law is unfair? Then is justice still just?" He was only a boy, but already thinking like a philosopher. His teachers were amazed. He could speak beautifully, write poetry, and debate ideas at a level far beyond his age. In fact, Plato first wanted to become a playwright or a poet. He wrote poems, plays, and even tried to enter public competitions. But something changed that dream forever. While Plato was growing up, Athens was not peaceful. The city was locked in a long and bloody war with Sparta, called the Peloponnesian War. This war lasted 27 years, and it shattered Athens. The democracy that Athens was proud of began to collapse. Leaders became corrupt. People became afraid. Justice disappeared. Truth was controlled by those in power. Plato saw this, and it broke something inside him. He began to lose faith in the government, the politicians, and even the people who were supposed to lead with wisdom. He realized something powerful. Education is not enough. Power is not enough. We need something deeper. We need philosophy, and that realization would shape the rest of his life. Around the age of 20, Plato met the man who would change his life forever, Socrates. Socrates was a strange figure in Athens. He walked barefoot. He didn't care about wealth or appearance. He never wrote anything down. But he was a giant of the mind. He would stop people on the street and ask them simple questions. What is justice? What is courage? What is truth? And when they answered, he would ask more questions, until they realized they didn't truly know what they were talking about. He wasn't trying to insult them. He was trying to help them see that real wisdom begins when you admit your ignorance. Plato was fascinated. He followed Socrates everywhere. He became his student, his friend, his listener, and later, his voice. He saw Socrates not as a man, but as a mission to wake people up, to think for themselves. After meeting Socrates, Plato gave up poetry. He burned his early poems, saying, "Socrates is the only man who ever made me feel ashamed of my ignorance." He stopped chasing fame. He stopped chasing power. He began chasing truth. And this is when the world began to change, not because of an army or a king, but because of a young man who dared to question everything. After Plato gave up his poetry and dreams of becoming a great playwright, he became something much more powerful. A student of truth. He spent every day with Socrates, not in classrooms, not in temples, but in the streets. Socrates would walk into the marketplace, stop a politician, a teacher, a soldier, and simply ask, "Do you believe you are wise?" They would always say yes. Then Socrates would begin to question them. Plato would watch in silence. He saw how proud men collapsed under their own ignorance. They were exposed, not by arguments, but by their own confused answers. Plato was not just learning ideas. He was learning how to think. He began writing down everything he heard Socrates say, not word for word, but as dialogues, conversations between minds. He didn't know it yet, but he was creating something the world would read for the next 2,400 years. But this beautiful time was about to end, in the most painful way. In the year 399 BCE, when Plato was around 28 or 29 years old, a dark cloud fell over Athens. Socrates, the man who had spent his life asking questions, was now accused of crimes. The charges? 1. Corrupting the youth of Athens, because young people were following Socrates and questioning their leaders. 2. Not believing in the gods of the city, because Socrates talked about a deeper spiritual truth, not the popular gods. The real reason? Socrates was too dangerous. He was shaking the minds of people. He was exposing the weakness of those in power. And powerful people hate being questioned. Plato was shocked, furious, and afraid. He watched as his teacher, his hero, his guide stood calmly in the courtroom, refusing to apologize. Socrates told the judges, "I would rather die than stop asking questions." He knew the price of truth, and he was ready to pay it. The judges sentenced Socrates to death. The punishment? Drink poison hemlock. A slow and painful way to die. Plato was present in those final moments. He described how Socrates drank the cup, slowly laid down, and began to lose feeling in his legs, then his arms, then his chest, until the poison reached his heart. But Socrates didn't cry. He didn't scream. He smiled and said, "The soul is eternal." Death is not the end. Plato could not forget that moment. That calm, that courage, that sacrifice. It didn't just hurt him. It rebuilt him. That day, Plato made a silent vow. The world may kill Socrates, but I will not let his voice die. And that promise changed history. After Socrates died, Athens became a place of danger for people like Plato. He was heartbroken, he was angry, and he was not ready to stay silent. But he also knew something important. If I stay here now, I will be destroyed. I must leave, not to escape, but to prepare. So Plato left Athens and began a long journey across the ancient world. He spent around 12 years traveling through Egypt, where he studied geometry, mathematics, and spiritual science from the Egyptian priests. Italy, southern Italy, and Sicily, where he studied the Pythagorean school, which believed that the entire universe is built on numbers and harmony. Cyrene and the Eastern Mediterranean, where he studied astronomy, politics, and more. This wasn't tourism. This was mental training. He was building his own worldview, piece by piece. He wasn't just collecting facts. He was connecting truths from different cultures. And during this time, Plato started writing. He began creating dialogues, philosophical texts where characters debate topics like what is justice, what is love, what is a good life, what is the purpose of government. He didn't preach, he made you think. And slowly, the boy who once followed Socrates was becoming a master of wisdom in his own right. Around 387 BCE, after more than a decade of study and writing, Plato returned to Athens. But he was not the same man. He had seen the world. He had studied with mystics, mathematicians, and philosophers. And now he was ready to do something that had never been done before. He bought a piece of land outside the city, in a grove of trees called Academus. There he founded a school, not just any school. It was the Academy, the first known university in Western history. The goal? Not to teach people what to think, but to teach them how to think. There were no degrees, no grades, no textbooks, just minds, debating, challenging, growing. Subjects included philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, ethics, politics, logic, metaphysics. People came from all over Greece to study there. The academy became a beacon of knowledge, and it stayed open for over 900 years, long after Plato's death. This wasn't just a school. This was Plato's revenge against ignorance, his answer to Socrates' death, his gift to the world. During this time, Plato wrote some of his most famous works, including The Republic, his vision of a just society, and his most famous book, The Symposium, a deep conversation about love, Phaedrus, about the soul, beauty, and inspiration, The Apology, Socrates' defense speech, Meno, asking whether virtue can be taught, Timaeus, about the origin of the universe. He used characters, dialogues, and questions, not boring lectures, to bring philosophy to life. He planted mental seeds in every reader's mind, seeds of curiosity, seeds of logic, seeds of rebellion against blind belief. Part 2. The Teacher of Teachers. How Plato Built Minds That Changed the World. Plato's academy was not a school in the modern sense. There were no fixed classrooms, no strict uniforms, no teacher talking while students copy. It was more like a living garden of thought. The academy stood just outside Athens, in a grove of olive trees that people believed was sacred to the hero Academus. Students would walk under the trees, sit on benches, or gather in small circles on the grass. There was a small building with scrolls and a few tables, but most of the teaching happened outdoors, with words, questions, and debates. The goal was not to pass exams. The goal was to train the soul. Plato would walk slowly among the students. Sometimes he would speak. Often, he would just ask questions and let students debate each other. The academy became a community where thinking was a way of life. People came from all over the Greek world, sons of merchants, future politicians, future generals, anyone who wanted to learn to think. They studied philosophy, how to live a good life, mathematics, the language of the universe, astronomy, understanding the heavens. Ethics, right and wrong. Politics, how societies should be organized. There were no subjects in the modern sense. Everything was connected. Plato believed that truth is one, and you must see the connections to understand it. This was completely new in human history. It was the first real university. One day, a 17-year-old boy from northern Greece arrived at the academy. His name was Aristotle. He was sharp, restless, and hungry to learn. He had lost his parents young and been raised by guardians. He came from the city of Stagira in Macedon, a place far from Athens, rougher, more practical. Aristotle entered the academy and stayed for 20 years. He became Plato's most brilliant student. Plato saw something extraordinary in him. Aristotle absorbed everything: ethics, logic, mathematics, biology, politics. He was constantly questioning, taking notes, creating ideas of his own. The academy became a forge, and Aristotle was one of its finest creations. Later, Aristotle would go on to teach Alexander the Great, who would conquer half the known world. In this way, Plato's academy indirectly shaped not just minds, but empires. While he was teaching, Plato continued to write. Each work was like a new door into the mind. He used the dialogue form, making ideas feel like living conversations. Some of the key works he wrote during or after founding the academy: The Republic, his vision of the ideal state. Plato describes a society ruled by philosopher kings, leaders who love wisdom more than power. He introduces the famous allegory of the cave, a story about prisoners who only see shadows on a wall and must break free to see reality. The Symposium, a lively dinner party conversation about love, where different speakers give speeches about what love really is. Phaedrus, on the soul, beauty, and inspiration. Gorgias, on rhetoric and the dangers of manipulation. Laws, his last and longest dialogue, laying out a practical legal system for a city. These weren't dry texts. They were written like plays, full of characters, stories, and memorable lines. Even today, people quote Plato without realizing it. Every dialogue was also an act of preservation. Plato was making sure Socrates' spirit lived on. Socrates appears as a character in most of the dialogues, continuing to ask questions, continuing to challenge the reader. Although Plato loved teaching, he also wanted to apply his ideas to real governments. He believed that philosophers could help shape just rulers and just cities. He made several trips to Sicily, to the city of Syracuse, where the young ruler Dionysius II was in power. Plato's friend Dion believed they could educate Dionysius into becoming a philosopher king. Plato traveled there hoping to guide the young ruler. But reality was not so simple. The court of Syracuse was full of intrigue, jealousy, and danger. Dionysius was not ready for deep philosophy. Court officials whispered against Plato. Dion fell out of favor and was exiled. Plato himself was accused of plotting and at one point was even held as a kind of prisoner. He was eventually allowed to leave, but the experience left a mark on him. It showed how difficult it was to bring philosophy into real politics. Yet Plato did not give up his dream of a just society. He returned to Athens and poured his energy back into teaching and writing. During these years, Plato developed his most famous philosophical theory, the theory of forms. He argued that everything we see in the physical world, trees, chairs, people, is only a shadow or a copy of a perfect form or idea that exists beyond the senses. Just like in the allegory of the cave, most people see only shadows. The philosopher turns around and sees the light, the true reality. This idea influenced not just philosophy, but religion, art, and science for centuries. It taught people to look beyond appearances, to search for deeper principles. Plato also explored the nature of the soul, justice, education, and leadership. He believed education was the process of turning the soul, helping people face the light instead of the shadows. By this time, the academy was famous. Students came from across Greece and beyond. Many went on to become teachers, lawmakers, and advisors. Through them, Plato's ideas spread to cities, kingdoms, and later, entire civilizations. Even though Plato had failed to create a philosopher king in Syracuse, he succeeded in something much greater, creating generations of philosopher citizens. The academy itself lasted for centuries, surviving wars and changing rulers. It became a model for future schools, including those of the Romans and later the great universities of Europe. As the years passed, Plato became more than a teacher. He became a symbol, a living legend in Athens. People spoke his name with respect, not because of his wealth or status, but because of his mind. He walked slowly now. His beard had grown white. His voice was softer. But when he entered a debate or opened his mouth to speak, the entire academy listened. He was no longer just explaining Socrates. He was now building his own identity as a philosopher. And though age was catching up, Plato wasn't slowing down. He was becoming bolder, deeper, and more determined. He knew time was limited, and he still had one final mission left. Many people think Plato's most important work is The Republic, where he outlines his vision for a just society ruled by philosopher kings. But in his later years, he began writing something even more ambitious. A work so massive, so detailed, that it took him years to complete. A work called The Laws. Unlike The Republic, which was more idealistic, The Laws was practical. It was Plato's blueprint for a real city, with real laws, real systems, real education, and real rules for daily life. He knew now that ideas alone couldn't change the world. They had to be applied. In this book, he discussed what kind of education children should receive, how marriage and families should work, what laws should exist to stop corruption, how music and art should be used to build character, what kind of punishment and rewards can shape moral citizens. This wasn't theory. This was a real model for real civilization. It was clear. Plato was not running from politics anymore. He was facing it with the sharpest weapon he had, his mind. And he worked on the laws until the very end of his life. While Plato was writing, another story was developing. A quiet, philosophical storm. Aristotle, his brightest student, was no longer just a student. He was beginning to question Plato's teachings. Aristotle believed that Plato's theory of forms, the idea that perfect forms exist beyond this world, was too mystical, too abstract. Aristotle wanted to study what we can observe, what we can see and measure. He focused more on logic, biology, science, and classification. And while Plato believed that philosophers should stay separate from power, Aristotle believed philosophy could serve power and shape rulers directly. This created a philosophical split. Plato never attacked Aristotle publicly. He still respected him deeply. But the division was clear, and it shaped Western thought for centuries. Two visions. Plato, the dreamer of eternal truths. Aristotle, the organizer of practical reality. And yet, Both were necessary, both were brilliant, and both were born in the same garden of thought, the Academy. In the years after Plato had finished teaching Aristotle, something unexpected happened. Aristotle was invited by King Philip II of Macedon to become the tutor of his son, a young boy named Alexander. Yes, Alexander the Great. Through Aristotle, Plato's ideas entered the mind of a king, a boy who would go on to conquer Egypt, Persia, and reach India. This is what made Plato different. He didn't just write books. He didn't just teach students. He created a chain reaction of minds. Socrates inspired Plato. Plato trained Aristotle. Aristotle shaped Alexander the Great. Alexander spread Greek ideas, culture, and philosophy across 3 continents. Even though Plato never ruled a city, never commanded an army, never wore a crown, his thoughts traveled further than any soldier could march. As Plato entered his late 70s and early 80s, he spent more time in quiet reflection. But he never stopped teaching. He would still sit in the shade of olive trees, listening to young students debate ideas, smiling when they asked the same questions he once asked Socrates. He was no longer trying to prove anything. He was simply guiding, like a lighthouse guiding ships to shore. People would visit from distant lands just to hear his voice or touch his hand. For them, Plato was not just a man. He was a mind made human. His body was old, but his mind was sharp. He continued working on the laws until the very end. Some say he was writing the book on his deathbed, surrounded by scrolls and candlelight. Plato died around the year 347 BCE, likely at the age of 80 or 81. The exact moment of his death is not recorded in great detail. There were no grand ceremonies, no royal funerals. He passed away quietly, in Athens, the city where he was born. But in truth, Plato did not die, because Plato was not just a body. Plato was an idea that truth matters, even if it costs your life. That thinking deeply is more powerful than speaking loudly. That education is the highest form of justice. And that a mind trained to think is more dangerous than any army. Part 3. The Resurrection of a Mind. How Plato's words were lost, hunted, and reborn. Across time, he left behind questions. He left behind conversations. He left behind a school that trained people to think freely. And this is how his ideas began to live a secret second life, long after his body returned to the earth. After Plato's death, his nephew Speusippus took over the academy. He continued the mission, teaching philosophy, mathematics, ethics, and politics. The academy remained a sacred space where no weapons were allowed and where truth mattered more than power. And generation after generation, brilliant minds kept walking through its gates. Over the centuries, Plato's academy survived the rise and fall of governments, the burning of cities, and the changing of rulers. But something even more powerful was about to happen. Plato's ideas were going to leave Greece and begin their long, dangerous journey across the world. As the Roman Empire rose in power, it absorbed many parts of Greek culture, including art, architecture, literature, and philosophy. But Romans were more practical than philosophical. They built roads, aqueducts, and armies. They loved action more than abstraction. So Plato's work didn't spread fast in the early Roman world. It was seen as too abstract, too complex, too Greek. But a few Roman thinkers like Cicero began to read and respect Plato's work. They translated parts of his writing and introduced his ideas to Roman schools. However, the Roman Empire had a limit. When Christianity began to grow, the Roman world started changing, and Plato's ideas had to survive in secret. By the 4th century CE, Christianity became the dominant force in the Roman Empire. Now came a major challenge for Plato's legacy. Many Christian leaders saw Greek philosophy as dangerous, something that questioned faith, God, and obedience. Books were burned, schools were closed. In 529 CE, Emperor Justinian officially shut down Plato's academy after 900 years of continuous teaching. It was a tragedy. The last students were told to leave. Some fled to Persia, some disappeared, many lost their homes. It looked like Plato was finally gone. But truth can't be killed so easily. In fact, something surprising was happening behind the scenes. Even though Plato's academy was destroyed, many of his dialogues had already been copied by hand. These scrolls, delicate, written in ink on parchment or papyrus, were carried by monks, hidden in monasteries, preserved in dark libraries, or even buried underground. Some copies were taken to Byzantium, modern-day Istanbul. Others were carried to the Islamic world, where scholars translated them into Arabic. Yes, during the Islamic Golden Age, 8th to 12th centuries, Muslim philosophers deeply studied Plato's works. In places like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba, thinkers like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and Averroes explored Plato's ideas, alongside Aristotle's. Plato's writings were translated, discussed, and even challenged in the Middle East while Europe was still in the Dark Ages. This is how Plato's spirit survived, through the pens of Arabic scholars in the lands far from Athens. Fast forward to the 15th century. Europe was waking up. Artists, scientists, writers. They began looking back to ancient texts for inspiration. This was the time of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Galileo. And guess what they found? Plato. Thanks to preserved Arabic translations and a few remaining Greek copies, Plato's dialogues began to return to Europe, now printed with the invention of the printing press. One man in particular, Marsilio Ficino, a Catholic priest and philosopher in Italy, translated Plato's works into Latin. He opened the Platonic Academy in Florence, Italy, inspired by the original. Plato was back. But now he wasn't just a philosopher. He was a source of light in a world that had forgotten how to think. Plato's return during the Renaissance helped spark a fire across Europe. Artists began to study beauty and form through his ideas. Scientists used Plato's belief in abstract truth to guide their experiments. Political thinkers read the Republic and dreamed of better societies. Plato's idea of truth beyond appearances helped people start questioning kings, priests, and old beliefs. Even though he lived over 1,800 years earlier, Plato became a revolutionary. He became the silent partner of Copernicus, Descartes, Newton, and later Einstein, because all of them believed what Plato believed. There is more to reality than what we see. Look deeper. Ask better questions. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Europe entered the Enlightenment, an era of reason, science, and political revolution. Philosophers like Kant, Hegel, and Rousseau read Plato. They used his ideas to rethink government, freedom, morality, and justice. Even Karl Marx, the father of communism, studied Plato's Republic when thinking about an ideal society. And in the modern era, professors, psychologists, teachers, and spiritual thinkers continue to return to Plato again and again to find answers to life's hardest questions. Why? Because Plato was not a man of answers. He was a man of questions, and the world never runs out of questions. How many works of Plato survive today? Today, we have over 25 full dialogues written by Plato. Most of them are preserved completely. Some may be lost forever. Some famous ones include the Republic, the Apology, the Symposium, the Phaedrus, the Meno, the Phaedo, the Timaeus, the Laws, his last and longest work. They are taught in over 90 countries, in hundreds of universities, in over 40 languages, and are available freely online. They are part of humanity's greatest library. Part 4. The Eternal Flame. Why Plato Will Never Die. Who was Plato? Really, he never ruled an empire. He never led an army. He never wrote poetry for fame or politics for power. He didn't believe in speaking to win. He believed in speaking to wake people up. He was not a prophet, not a warrior, not a king. But Plato was something even more rare. He was a man who chose truth over everything. From the moment he met Socrates, he gave up comfort for questions. He gave up applause for silence. He gave up luxury for logic. He gave up being somebody to understand everything. He was a mind on fire, and that fire still burns. Let's explore why. In the last years of his life, Plato wrote not just about cities and governments, but about the soul. He believed something that shocked many in his time, that the soul is eternal, that death is not the end, that our bodies are just temporary vehicles, that true knowledge comes from remembering what the soul already knows. This was revolutionary. Most people at the time saw death as the end. Plato saw it as a return, a coming home. In the Phaedo, he describes Socrates' final moments. And through Socrates, Plato gives us this truth. The soul is like a bird trapped in a cage. Death is not loss. It is freedom. In another dialogue, the Symposium, he talks about love, not as just attraction between people, but as a spiritual ladder. At the bottom is physical attraction. Then comes love of the mind. Then love of beauty itself. And finally, love of truth. In Plato's world, real love is the desire to unite with eternal truth. He believed love was the engine of growth, and the soul was the traveler. You may not realize it, but Plato is everywhere. When you ask, what is real? You are thinking like Plato. When you say, I want to understand myself, you are following his path. When a teacher asks a student a question to make them think, that's the Socratic method, which Plato preserved. He's in our schools, our science, our psychology, our ethics, our spirituality, and even in our films and stories. Ever heard of movies like The Matrix, Inception, Interstellar? All of them ask, what is real? What is illusion? What is the soul? That's Plato's voice echoing through time. He taught us not what to think, but how to think. And that gift is still growing. Whether you're rich or poor, young or old, English beginner or advanced learner, Plato gives you 7 eternal lessons. 1. Learn to be a follower before you try to be a master. Plato didn't become a master philosopher overnight. First, he was a silent listener. He sat at Socrates' feet. He watched, listened, and absorbed. For years. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pretend to be smart. He followed with humility. And only after mastering how to follow did he build the academy, write the Republic, and become one of the greatest minds in history. Lesson? Don't rush to lead. Learn, observe, absorb. And when the time is right, you won't need to shout. Your wisdom will speak for itself. 2. Be content with the title. but obsessed with the work. Plato was never obsessed with fame or recognition. He never tried to be a celebrity. He never even gave himself the title philosopher. Others called him that because of the work he did. He taught daily, he wrote, he questioned, but he didn't chase applause. Lesson: be happy with a simple title. Student, writer, teacher, creator. What matters is what you do, not what people call you. 3. Be the charge of your own happiness. Plato believed the soul must be trained. He taught that true happiness doesn't come from the outside. It comes from inner balance. He said, "The man who makes everything that leads to happiness depend upon himself has adopted the very best plan for living happily." In today's world, we blame people, jobs, money, or society. Plato tells us, stop blaming. Your soul has power. Your happiness is your charge, your responsibility. 4. Work hard to accomplish great things. Plato spent decades writing, teaching, questioning, and building the academy. He didn't rely on shortcuts. He believed that the soul grows only through discipline and effort. He said, "Excellence is not a gift, but a skill that takes practice. We do not act rightly because we are excellent. We become excellent by acting rightly. So don't wait to feel ready. Start acting. Start practicing. Start doing. Hard work isn't optional. It's the path." 5. Contribute to society as much as you can. Plato believed we are all part of a bigger system, a city, a society, a community. He said that a just man is not just good alone. He must be good for others. In the Republic, every person in the city has a role. No role is more or less important, but every role must be done with excellence. Lesson: help your society rise. Don't just live, contribute. Your skills, your voice, your values, they matter. 6. Get involved in politics, or be ruled by the wrong people. One of Plato's most famous warnings. The price good men pay for not getting involved in politics is to be governed by worse men. He didn't mean everyone should become a politician. He meant, don't be silent. Don't be passive. Learn what's happening. Speak with reason. Vote with care. Be aware. If good people disappear from decisions, bad people will take their place. 7. Democracy can be dangerous if minds are not trained. Plato experienced the death of Socrates, who was killed by a democratic vote. Ordinary citizens, without deep thought, voted for fear and emotion, and ended the life of the wisest man in Athens. That's why Plato warned, democracy without education becomes chaos. He believed in wisdom-led leadership, not popularity contests. He wanted a world where philosophers rule, not just the loudest voice. Lesson: freedom is powerful, but without knowledge, it becomes a weapon against itself. That's why Plato created the academy, to train minds before giving them power. If these lessons made you think deeply, if this story opened your heart, if it helped you think differently, if it made your English better, your life better, or your mind calmer, then this is your place. Subscribe now, because this channel is not just about English. It's about truth. It's about meaning. It's about becoming something more. And just like Plato taught, don't follow the noise, follow the light. Stay curious, stay strong, and remember, your soul is powerful. See you in the next video.